And we're live with our 268th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host, Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Ken and I are super excited to have Clint back on the show. It's been a while and a lot has happened in his life, in our lives, both personally and career-wise, that we want to dig into. Before we do that, though, I did want to give a shout out to Redpoint as our sponsor for today. Redpoint Security specializes in code security by coders, which is bolstered by years of experience testing applications and conducting code reviews against all types of applications. Redpoint also offers secure code training to help ground your teams in better security practices across the development lifecycle. So check out redpointsecurity.com for more information and put your company on a path to better security. Thanks to Redpoint. Outside of Redpoint, Ken and I have been training. We did our first iteration of harnessing LLMs for application security last week. Virtual training went very well. Super excited to put that out there further. And there will be more opportunities come January, February from a virtual perspective. And hopefully we'll get to some conference as well, do some in-person for that and practical secure code review, which is how we actually met Clint for the first time. I think this was 2018. Yes. At AppSec. Was it AppSec Cali? It was one of the AppSec.
Maybe a global AppSec.
AppSec.
Something.
Was it global? Yeah. I think it was global AppSec in California. Might have been San Francisco or whatever, right? I distinctly remember you being in class and having that discussion about secure code review. And, this was before the DRSec days as well, which has taken off. Just great to see. And then we also had you on the podcast. I was trying to remember what episode that was years and years ago, but I'm going to look it up really quick. Clint, episode 115, right? So nice. That's been quite a while, considering that's 150 some odd episodes ago. That's a number of years. So and I know when we initially talked, it was still R2C, like things have changed over for you at Semgrep. And so there's a lot that we do want to dig into. But let's start there, right? Like, what does your, current position look like? It's been a number of years. Like we can reference the previous, the previous session that we had or the previous podcast episode. But what have you been doing since then? It's been a few years, right? Like, what does your day-to-day look like at Semgrep? Like, what's your current position? And then I know we have more questions because there's a lot to discuss. So go ahead, cool. Clint.
Well, yeah, first, thank you both so much for having me. It's always a pleasure hanging out with you guys. I think, let's see. So yeah, a little bit of background. So I'm currently the head of security research at Semgrep, which is a code analysis company. So I joined when we were, I joined actually right before the pandemic. So in retrospect, or at the time, I was like, it may not be the best thing to start at a small startup, like right before a uncertain global pandemic, but it turned out okay so far. So we had around like 20 people at the time, and then we have around like 150 or 160 now. So definitely a lot of growth, which has been very exciting. And I can talk about any of that more in detail, but yeah, going from like a company that's like trying to figure out what to build to having like one thing that's kind of working and then launching additional products, from like first party code scanning like SAST to SCA to secret scanning to having some AI enabled features. Like it's interesting, like the 0 to 1 and then the 1 to N, I think is sort of like an interesting transition. And then, yeah, I've also been running the DRSec newsletter, which is sort of a free weekly curation-based newsletter of here's cool things happening in AppSec, cloud, containers, AI, red team, blue team, supply chain, sort of all the things. I feel like there's always more things that I want to include, but I don't have time. So I just do the best I can.
Well, and that was one of my initial thoughts, right? Like as we've watched TLDRSec grow over time, one of my questions is how you actually stay up on what you include in the newsletter. You mentioned that it is a curated newsletter, and the amount of content that's in there, and the fact that it has spun out from, in the initial iterations were more AppSec, kind of NetSec focused, CloudSec, right? And you've got into blue and red team and, software supply chain and everything else. How do you stay on top of that? Like, do you just have like more hours in the day than the rest of us, or what's happening there?
Yeah. Let's see. So I guess that's maybe two questions. One is like the sourcing material aspect, and the other is just like the sheer sort of time aspect. Both of which are great questions. So in terms of sources, yeah, I just spend a lot of time on, say, Twitter, LinkedIn, or other social media platforms like Reddit, NetSec. There's a bunch of things. There's a number of company blogs as well as individual blogs that I sort of subscribe to their RSS. And then one thing that I didn't, there's a bunch of other great security newsletters that I also read. I think I probably read more security newsletters than most people, which is, I guess, ironic because I also write one. But yeah, there's like 10-ish I probably read weekly. And another thing that I didn't expect when I started is that a great source is actually just people DMing me things. So I would say like a non-trivial percentage of things I find are just on email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Someone's just like, hey, I did this thing, or, my buddy just released this tool, and I check it out and I'm like, hey, like none of my other sources showed me this, but this is like really rad. So that's also, it's not something I expected when I started, but has actually been a great source. Sometimes it's not good, but sometimes it's really good.
What are a few of the newsletters that you tend to read, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. Let's see.
A few of your favorite, or one or two of your favorite, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, I mean, so I have to give a shout out to my friend Daniel Miesler, who writes the Unsupervised Learning newsletter, which I think is really great for like broad coverage of a bunch of different security things, but also humanity, where technology is going. He's written a bunch of like opinion pieces on AI and where he sees that going, which I think have been really interesting. Let's see. So there's a bunch of like specific ones in terms of, so Kyle Kelly does like Cram Hacks, which is sort of supply chain security-ish. Marco Lancini does CloudSec List, which is sort of cloud. Daniel Grizelak does AWS Security Digest. Zach Allen does detection engineering. Let's see. Matt Johansson does kind of like a broad coverage of a number of things. Chris Hughes does also kind of a coverage of a bunch of things, but with a focus on sort of like government, gov tech, and like public sector stuff. Yeah, Security does sort of like bug bounty newsletter-ish themed things. Mike Privet does Return on Security, which is sort of like fundraising, acquisitions, stuff like that. Let's see. Yeah, I feel like there's going to be some that I leave out, but
don't worry about it. It's fun to watch Seth try to keep up with it.
Keep up there.
He just posted link after link after link after. That's awesome. It's
we might have to. Yeah, we might have to do a list after this. But yeah, go ahead, Ken. So.
Oh no, I had nothing important to say. I was just going to say I was a little bummed because Kyle Kelly had a moment where he was trying to figure out his next move recently, and man, I definitely wish we could have scooped Kyle up, but he ended up landing somewhere. It looks like I don't know, maybe Sweden or Norway or something like that. I can't remember, but it seems like he's gonna have a fun journey. But yeah, anyways, Kyle Kelly, very smart guy. Yeah.
You might be mixing up Kyle with Rami McCarthy, who is also my friend, and he's in Sweden. Both are great people who I like a lot. But yeah, Rami and I used to work together at NCC Group, and then he was at a couple of other places, and then I think Figma, and then yeah, he I mean, I don't want to share too much of his personal life, but he met a lovely partner, and I think is in Sweden now.
Oh, that must be what it is. I do tend to get people mixed up. That's probably what it was. But thanks for the correction there. But yeah, we had Kyle Kelly on a while ago, and then Rami we've had on as well. So both are great folks. Yeah. So On that note of the newsletter, of keeping up with things, the industry as it were, we did want to chat about, and I know we had talked about this ahead of time. We wanted to chat a little bit about what are some current trends you're seeing emerge in the software security space. And where's you we can take this conversation wherever you want, but generally speaking, where do you think the next few years? It's hard to predict. I would say it's pretty hard to predict past a few years, but where in the next few years do you see things sort of trending towards? It's a
Yeah.
very broad question. I totally understand that.
Sure. Yeah. It's a great question. Oh yeah, and just to finish wrapping up, I think Seth, you were asking also about just like the time aspect. So I'm happy
Yeah.
to go into more details, but I
Oh
think
yeah.
to be honest, just like personal sacrifice is
Yeah.
sort of the answer. And there's been like a lot of positive aspects, but there also is yeah, I mean it just fundamentally takes time and everyone has the same amount of time in the day. So
Yeah.
just when other people are doing social things or spending time with their family or friends, me or people like me are like working. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Well,
there's
and
not
that's
like a happy hack answer here.
yeah.
Anecdotally, I would say a number of the people who are very public facing have built audiences or things that you're like, wow, this is so amazing. Look at what they've done. Um, they all tend to be working very hard often and for long periods of time, in my experience,
Yeah.
getting to know them as someone who is also in that circle. So there's
Yeah.
not really a shortcut, at least that I've
Which
seen.
is, yeah, I mean, that's always the difficult thing because we, from the outside, a lot of times, like we see the output, right? Like we see these great research articles, we see other things that come out, right? Like, I kind of have the same question for a lot of the researchers that are actually able to put out like so much. And when it comes down to it, it's where they're putting their personal time, but also like how much support they get from a company and other things, right? Like how much time they can put into it. Because I don't feel like, even with some of the summarization tools, that AI can short circuit that. Like your understanding of low level technical details of what is relevant to the community, what is relevant to you personally, is not something that is easily, to your point, short circuited, right? I mean, we know what it is like labor of love wise from a podcast perspective and like the time that we have to put
Totally.
into it. And
And the
and I do
training.
feel like, yeah, and the training and like the amount of just uh, background that needs to go into any of that. And to be honest, like, we started like doing a weekly newsletter associated with the podcast, that is focused on that specific episode. And like, to be frank, it's it has changed my appreciation for what time you spend trying to curate all of the different articles, or that Daniel spends, like the amount of time that it takes to actually comb through, find something that's interesting to you, comment on it, read it, digest what it is. And this is even after like, condensing what we do on the podcast and making sure that that is also in there. So kudos. I guess that's all I wanted to say. Like it is very much appreciated on our side, seeing that actually come out. And I think,
Well, thank
it
you.
shows the number of subscribers that you've got, right? Like TLDRSec is commonly referenced as, hey, if you want to know what's going on, or, want to dig into some new research, this is a good place to start.
Well, thank you. That feels
Yeah.
really good to hear and helps me give me motivation to continue when it's late on a Wednesday night and once
Yeah.
more I am trying to finish it. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and I
Yes.
don't want to be like a woe is me because certainly like a lot of good things have happened because of it. I just want to be very upfront with people about like, yeah, it does take a lot of
Mhm.
time. I really appreciate your guys' podcast. Like I know how much time that takes as someone who does only text and not like multimedia. Like I know how much adding in video and logistics and editing and stuff like that's a huge amount of work too. So
Mhm.
so yeah, so I really respect that as well. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
yeah,
glad to hear that you don't have an easy button, because there are times where like I definitely feel like, man, pointing, or case in point, like recently for the course. I mean, Seth and I had like some very, very, very late nights where we just didn't
mm,
sleep much. And you sit there, and I do anyways. I sit there and I think, man, there has to be an easier way. I must be just like not embracing some better ways of working or whatever. So I don't know. At least I don't feel as bad about things like that when it's like, no, there is not an easy button. It's like good to know. At least one other person I respect doesn't feel like there's an easy button for that. So
Yeah, I think anyone I've seen who is at the top of their field in like whatever field, it seems to always be a combination of like this person tends to have like medium to high natural ability. They work very hard, and they have worked hard for like years and years and years. Like it's not just one of those three. It's usually all of them. Like you can get pretty good with like one or two of them, but if you look at the top people of any field, it's pretty much like natural talent plus works really hard plus has done that for like 10 years. So I don't
consistency.
know.
Yeah,
like
consistency is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's humbling, but it also makes me feel better. I don't know. But yeah, to your guys' point, it's like people see the output, but they don't want to put in the input that the person put in to get the output. So,
well, yeah. I mean, that's it. Like how many security blogs, how many newsletters like start, from a I don't know, company perspective or whatever it is, like a personal perspective. And then once people realize the amount of time that it takes, it's, it's hard to justify, right? When you have other focuses, when family pressures or whatever else pop up, right? Like there is a level of personal sacrifice that goes into it, right? To make it happen. So, anyway. Yeah, we could probably move on from that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy to share more about it, but yeah, I would say it is not hard to continue, it is difficult to continue even for me, and I've been doing it for like 5 years. So,
and it ebbs and flows too, right? Like, so you started DRSec about the same time that we started Absolute AppSec, to be honest, right? Like,
yeah.
And it ebbs and flows because there's times that, with holidays, with personal life and everything that happens, like we miss weeks, right? And that, and I feel like a certain level of like disappointment personally, right? Like when that happens, even though it's like, we're doing this as a service, right? Like it's, yes, there's great things that come from it. There's a great community, but on the flip side, it's also like, hey, that's going to happen. And everyone is a person, and there's got to be a certain amount of grace when, it doesn't show up at exactly 8 a.m. on a Thursday morning or whatever it is, Clint, right? Like, we understand that there is a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. What's crazy is I'm going to knock on wood, but I don't think I've yet ever gotten so sick that I've not been able to do an issue. So I don't know
That's incredible.
What that says about me or my life, but
I was going to say, what supplements are you on?
Yeah, exactly.
Emergency every day, or some sort of vitamin. Well, I need whatever multi-purpose vitamin. It's a Flintstone vitamin, isn't it? That's what you're taking.
Yeah, I'm actually launching a DRSec supplement, which is how I've been able to not get sick these years. So yeah, I mean, you got to get into the supplement business if you're a creator. Yeah, that's what's up.
Yeah.
Actually,
this is launching it. Yeah.
I wanted to announce it here. You heard it here first.
That's what all of these 5 years have culminated in. That's the real reason you started the newsletter. So, actually, on that note, like kind of on that note,
supplement, but we're pivoting here. Is that?
Yeah. What's your take on TRT now?
We started our manosphere section.
Yeah.
There you go. Exactly. What do you? I'm curious about I am joking aside. I am curious because like it brings up kind of a good point where there's two types of newsletter or ways I've seen people sort of be be financially rewarded, we'll say, for their newsletter. There's one where there's the subscription model where there's like a paid for. I think one that comes to mind is like I think Frankly Speaking is a subscriber, like you get some articles for free, and then you get ones that are only if you pay for them. And then there's the other model, which I believe yours is more sponsorship based. So you get the newsletter for free. I don't think you have like correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's like a VIP newsletter, right? There's just the newsletter, but there's sponsorship, I believe, that comes from that. And I'm just curious your sort of thoughts on the pros and cons of each, or why you chose one over the other. Maybe it's a happy accident. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say maybe like my broader meta observation is that one interesting thing about the newsletter journey has not just been like reading a lot about security, which is like why I started it and is my favorite part of it. But there's also a lot of like the business aspect. Like I've had to learn about like marketing, deliverability, sales, entrepreneurship, stuff like that. So that's been interesting as well. Yeah, I know more than an average person about like email subtleties and open rates and click rates and like measuring the health of a list or like of a subscriber and things like that, which are have been things that I didn't expect to learn along the way. And but in the past year or so, I've been spending more time learning about like newsletter or just media company business models. So yeah, how I ended up in the sponsorship model, it was really just an accident. And what happened was I was just doing DRSec, and then like some friends at different companies were like, "Hey, do you accept sponsorships? Can I like give you money to put an ad in?" And I was like, well, so I didn't for a while because I was like, well, I don't want people to think I'm a sellout, and everyone's going to unsubscribe and they're going to hate me. And so I like talked with a few friends about it, and they were surprisingly positive. They were like, Clint, I know this takes you a gazillion hours, and I find it useful, so I want you to be motivated to like not stop this thing. So like if that helps you continue, like that would be great. Um, and I wrote like a blog post that you can still see on the blog that's like why I chose to accept sponsors. Yeah, it was probably like 4 years ago now. I can link it, but it's like way deep in the archives. But yeah, basically it just happened organically, and it's a very easy way once you have. Oh, nice! You're probably faster at finding it than I would have been.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I think if you like, so there's platforms now like Beehive, which I use, or ConvertKit, or things that have built-in advertiser networks that you can sort of have various brands advertise in exchange for like basically how many. So again, this is sort of like the things I didn't know before. Like you could get paid on like a CPM basis. So basically, how big is your list? You could get paid on a CPC, like cost per click basis. Or if you're in a specific niche, especially a profitable niche, like a B2B thing like cybersecurity, you can also just charge like a flat rate per sponsor per issue. And yeah, so there's like lots of details there that I can go into, but I will just sort of keep it high level for now. So I think in terms of like paid content, I think that's also a great model if you. So one of the so a blog post I've started and I haven't finished yet is basically like looking at the most popular like monetization strategies for either newsletters or this like type of solopreneur type thing, and just been like, what are the pros and cons of each one, at least as I see them. And I've not finished that post yet. It's been like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months in the making. One challenge of like writing a weekly newsletter and then writing other things is that there's no forcing function for me to finish the other things. So they mostly don't get finished. So I have like 100 drafts that are like, have not seen the light of day.
Because the newsletter is always your number one sort of priority because it's on a deadline
Yeah,
basis.
it's a deadline. It has to get done. And I mean, basically, when it's too late and I need to go to bed, I just like whatever state it's in, it's done. Whereas when it's like something that doesn't have a deadline, it's like, well, I feel like it could be better, so I could like spend a few more days on it, which then sort of pushes it out.
And I relate to that. I fully get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say like the nice thing about sponsors is that it's kind of like easier and organic maybe to get started. And also you have to think of one way to think about newsletters is in terms, or just any, like this could also be podcast, YouTube, anything. It's like part of it is acquisition in terms of like acquiring new users and growing the user base over time, obviously retention of existing audience, and then the other aspect being like sort of monetization, whether that be paid content like Frank's or another newsletter, or like sponsors. And the challenge with if you have sort of a paid model is you still need, well, you need to like, assuming it's like a recurring, so I think Lenny's newsletter or the Pragmatic Engineer are also very popular subscription based. Like they have free content, but they have paid content as well. So if you have a paid offering, you need to regularly be providing paid users value, or else why are they paying you? But you
Right.
also need something that like attracts new users. So you probably need some sort of free content as well as sort of like top of funnel lead gen. So you kind of have to play both games at the same time, which can be hard if you're a solopreneur.
Mhm.
What the sponsorship model, like what that looks like when done well, I think either the Hustle or Morning Brew or things like that are good models where basically if you have a series of ad slots, how you make more money is you have more newsletters. Basically, like you send more frequently. Instead of once a week, you send twice a week, then 3 times a week. Maybe it's daily. Maybe you have separate newsletters. One is like security, or one is like cloud sec, one is supply chain, one is whatever. Like basically, you need more inventory to sell to make more money. So generally, you have like maybe you hire a couple of people who are writers. Maybe you have like an inbound or like outbound sales team. So you just like kind of like parallelize like doing more of the things, and then you're just like making more money that way. Like to be candid, one challenge that we're having right now is that there's more sponsor interest than I have slots. So I'm literally like leaving money on the table by not having like more advertising slots. But I
Yeah.
Yeah.
don't want it to be annoying to have like a bunch of ads in the newsletter. So I'm like leaving meaningful money on the table just because I philosophically don't want to right now.
Mhm.
So
Well, I'm sure the thought has come. Well, first, congrats. That's amazing. That's really strong. That's really awesome to have that sort of dilemma. Uh,
yeah, thank you.
no matter how it might feel. Secondly, I assume it's probably gone through your mind. Well, maybe I produce content in a different way and then use those sponsors for that additional content. But then you probably have other dilemmas with it. First of all, like time, you're already being accused by one of our listeners, Larry, of being a clone. So there's that. So I imagine time's a
wish.
factor, but also like, it's sort of like, do I want to make, do I have a burning desire probably to build that content versus just do it for these sponsors that are in this pool kind of thing. I would assume that's all going through your head when you make decisions about stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't, like I was thinking about writing something about this, but and I've chatted with friends about it, but to be honest, I haven't discussed it too much publicly, but I'm happy to give you sort of like a little preview behind the curtains of like some of my thought process about it. And I don't really have any answers yet, so I'd welcome any feedback you guys have as friends and peers. Um, like so one obvious thing would be like, so I already do one newsletter once a week, so I could basically double my sponsorship slots by just doing a second newsletter per week. And I did poll people on TLDRSec, and people were mixed about. Basically, I was like, hey, how would you feel about another issue per week, assuming it's the same level of quality? Maybe it's a little bit shorter, or both are a little bit shorter, because I don't want to like overwhelm you. I have had a number of people be like, hey, I love TLDRSec, but it stresses me out because I can't keep up with all the links. Like you're adding to my anxiety, even though I love it, and I don't want to do that to people. But so that would basically, assuming that I could fill those slots, that would like double revenue overnight by just having more availability. But I'm not sure, it could cause more people to unsubscribe or things
Mhm.
like that. So it's sort of unclear what the long term ramifications would be. I could do a podcast version where it's basically the same content as the existing thing, but has different sponsors. In addition to the podcast, there could be like a video version, or maybe it's like podcast plus video version, each of which could potentially have different sponsor slots. It would be unclear what the pricing would be because I would be starting from semi-zero in terms of like those audiences, in terms of people subscribing to like the YouTube or podcast. But eventually over time, those could become reasonable audiences. But yeah, it would take additional time every week to do that. And to be honest, like it's very rare for me to finish the newsletter before 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. Like
Mhm.
there's been times, but I would say out of 260 something issues, it's probably only happened a handful of times. And usually it's because I have some event that night, so I have to do it beforehand. But usually it's more like 10 p.m. to midnight, I would say, is like
Mhm.
the average time I finish.
It would be interesting. Sometimes you have articles that are kind of like the subject line, right? That's like the main thing that you're. I mean, there's lots of different articles, open source tools, lots of things you put in there, but oftentimes there is something you're sort of highlighting, or there's something at the top of the list that stands out to me and other readers and you, right, who puts it together.
Mhm.
So it would be interesting to see interviews with folks like that. Also, I feel like with that one, you could chop up into short clips, short digestible clips, and get a lot of mileage out of those. But you would definitely, like, I can tell you, just between all of us on the internet right now, watching this, listening to
Yeah.
this, and people that are going to listen to this later, we do have somebody that helps us out with scheduling, and I feel like that's probably so scheduling and social media posts and whatnot. I think that's been incredibly helpful, because that was actually the most time consuming, especially for me. It was taking a lot of time because people have different stuff that pops up, and you try to we do try to make sure now that we don't just do back to back to back to back guests, because people have expressed they like a mixture of just us going over topics as well as guests, high quality guests such as yourself, but a mix of how we chop that up. So when you basically, what I'm trying to say is, when you get into the scheduling game of guests and like promoting it and things like that, that gets pretty difficult. So if you could have someone helping there, yeah, that would go a long way. But I don't know, like,
Yeah, that's good feedback.
yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
I mean, one of mine, right? Like just reading DRSec on a weekly basis, right? I like the idea of not as much content in every single one, right? Like, and maybe a couple of times a week, but that's me personally being able to consume what's actually coming in. And it does, but then on the flip side, right? Like having it come in a single time every week, it means that, okay, I know it comes in once a week and then I refer back to it, right? Like I may not get to everything that's in there, but I will go back to it based on what it is that I'm interested in, what was in the newsletter that week. I mean, Evan's also commenting on YouTube about Patreon, like if you've considered that in the past, and just letting listeners or subscribers actually support, because some people do like to throw a few dollars here and there at the things that they like, right? Yeah, so
yeah, I appreciate the feedback. I think my plan would be, I don't know, I will foreshadow it here. I think the things that are currently most interesting to me are probably having like a paid newsletter or some sort of paid premium content, assuming I have time to regularly produce such things, or maybe some sort of course or something like that, which would probably be on something AI and security related. But I would just
cool.
see what people are interested in.
Yeah. Well, there's only so much time in the day, right? And where you want to actually spend that time. That's what it always kind of comes down to. Yeah. I mean, the content's useful to people, and the people are gonna, they're gonna like or dislike everything, right? Like it just kind of depends on how much of the audience is supportive and who isn't. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
This will be like the last thing I say about it, but one's just, you said about the internet and people liking or disliking things. I would say people have been surprisingly nice about TLDRsec over time. There's been very few people who have raged at me or said very negative things. So I was very nervous about this, to be candid, starting something and like writing things regularly on the internet. I was like expecting to get various people with strongly negative views. But yeah, there's been like one or two, but I would say really surprisingly few. People
Yeah, there's always going to be one or two. It is what it is. Yeah. But if you're on the whole for 5 years having overwhelmingly positive interactions, and obviously it's been very good for you and the community. That's probably why it's such a popular thing, is that it's so mutually beneficial for everyone. There's really only good things that come out of it. I mean, heck, I can't tell you how many times on the podcast we're doing a breakdown of an article where we're like, all right, this came from TLDRsec and blah 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 blah, right? So been hugely beneficial for everyone. So thank you for that, for sure. But Seth, it sounded like you were going to say something, so I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh no, I was just feeling like, yeah, like let's get back to Ken's question now, right? Like we've talked about the trend. Yeah, we talked about the background of TLDRsec and like promotions, kind of what the future looks like. Be interesting to watch, but let's talk about security trends, right? like, what is it that you see, right? Like, you're looking at quite a volume of content. But what is it that you foresee? I mean, we're coming to the end of 2024 as it is. So 2025 and beyond, what is it that you're looking forward to? What are you seeing as the trends as things move forward?
For sure. I think, let's see, one topic that I've been very passionate about that I'm excited to see gaining more traction over the years is this idea of secure by default, or paved road, as Netflix likes to call it. Basically, and CISA had some things about this as well. Basically, like, how do we make it easy as possible to do the secure thing and make it hard to do the insecure thing? Um, and sort of along these lines, I see there's a couple of like thematic things that I feel like come together with this. Another is security teams viewing themselves more as sort of service organizations, with developers being their customers. So rather than just being like sort of, hey, you have to do this because I said so, thinking about the developer experience, thinking about being like a business enabler. Like, how do I enable the business to ship quality product quickly so that we can make more money, so that we can beat our competitors, but also do it at an acceptable level of risk. So, like, partnering with platform engineering teams, and yeah, just maybe to take a step back, thinking more broadly, like, how can security be yeah, something that makes everyone in the organization's lives better, faster, more efficient, um, and looking for like mutual wins, where maybe, for example, for security purposes, you might want some sort of asset inventory to be like, okay, what sort of services are we running? Who owns those things? So, for example, if there's like a bug bounty a bug bounty submission, you might want to be like, okay, cool, who owns this microservice or team? So, like, being able to tie who owns a thing to like what's all in your environment, that's useful for security, but it's also useful for engineering too, in terms of like, I don't know, on calls, handoffs, or really just like being like a high performing engineering team. So I
Mhm.
think, so yeah, so secure by default, or secure guardrails, or paved road, however you want to call it, like, let's make things very easy to be secure and hard to be insecure. And then also taking like a developer customer centric approach to security. So those are a couple. Maybe I'll list a few more, and then we can dive into detail and into any more of them. So another trend within sort of the blue team space, detection engineering. So how do we treat writing detections as sort of software engineering, in terms of detection as code, having integration tests for those things to make sure that they're working as expected. Um, I guess like security data lake, like having a bunch of your um, logs and telemetry from like cloud, endpoint, all the different things in one place. So kind of taking like big data analytics approach, or like business intelligence that other parts of the org are doing, like kind of doing that, but for like security as well. Um, and then I think applying, well, I would say AI security, which to me is more like two things, which is securing AI and then applying AI to security domains, which I think are meaningfully separate. Um, but yeah, I would say those are a couple of trends.
And I feel
Cool.
like the data lake and AI bit probably feed into each other as well, because that's what it's really good at, is summarizing big bits of data. So there's almost like there are an intersection of two of those. Yeah, secure by default's like, I've seen that in action, and it I mean, we did some things like that at GitHub, right? So like HTML pipelines, there was a safe way to render HTML. Um, Actually, this is something you talked about, I think, on the last time maybe you were here, which was eliminating bug classes, or whole classes of bugs, and like secure
Yep.
defaults is a really nice way to do that. Just
Yeah.
saying, hey,
Well, and I
like,
know there was also that recent, like, the secure defaults. Tanya spoke about it a little bit when she came on. I was just going to reference that from Semgrep as well, because there was the post and the docs that have come out of Semgrep recently on that. Like, this has been a common theme. I mean, since you were on that first time, right? Like, I remember talking about the Netflix secure guardrails and the team that was over there, how they put that into place and how impressive that was. Um, selfishly, right? Like the organizations that I work into still struggle with this, right? It is uncommon that I walk into an organization and I see anything that has any sort of sniff of secure defaults in it. It's a lot of still the engineering org building things without security inputs or without a security team, period. And they're trying to patch things after the fact. So it's kind of hard for me to see a pathway forward, but that's just me being a third party coming into organizations that need a lot of security help, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that very much aligns with, well, I guess for sort of my personal origin story, or like how I was first hearing about this stuff and started believing in it. So I was also a security consultant at NCC Group at the time, doing a bunch of pen tests for all the companies. And I started hanging out with friends of mine at like Dropbox and Google and Slack and Netflix and all these sort of very Bay Area tech first companies, which are very unrepresentative of like the tech industry as a whole. But
Yes.
what I found, what I found is they were like, yeah, like all this like vulnerability finding stuff is cool, but it's sort of like the I don't know, the social network meme, like, but do you know what's really cool? Eliminating bug classes. And at the time I was like, oh, gradually it made sense. And then I was like, oh, like clearly this is the way. And naively I thought at the time, like, oh, clearly people will do this. They just haven't heard about it. So I just need to tell them about it, and then everyone will do this. And I think my growing up, or my loss of naivete, has been like, actually, there's like 50 reasons why this is very hard that are very organization and company dependent. And so I do think most companies probably do not do this well because it's just objectively very hard. But I think one of my predictions and hope for the future is that gradually we, as a security community, do make this easier. And I think it has gotten easier in terms of like modern web frameworks, for example, do a lot of things out of the box securely. They're like, cool, CSRF token and validation, that's handled transparently, output encoding by default, ORMs like solving SQL injection for the most part. Like there are many classes of things that like if a developer never thinks about security and doesn't know anything about security, but they use a modern version of a modern framework, they're going to be like 2 to 5x better ahead than they would have been like 10 years ago, even if they were like more competent at security. So I think things are getting better. Oh, and I did actually launch a GitHub project with my friend Rami that Ken you were talking about before. It's like
unknowingly.
TLDRSec / like secure defaults, where we just tried to collect various tools, libraries, frameworks that basically they do X but like securely by default. So I think what I would love to see in the future, a lot of companies build their own whatever internally. Like I don't know, I'm sure like tens of companies have been like, hey, we're a Java shop and this is how you parse or handle XML without XXE or something, and they've written their own like custom wrapper for it. Like I feel like there's probably like tens of those like internal libraries across companies, and my hope is that over time as a community we're like, what are the things that are sharp edges, what are the things that are like easy to foot gun yourself, and then let's just have like a pretty reasonable version that someone open sources, and then we sort of can get behind as a community so that we just don't have to keep reinventing the same solution a bunch of times. And then over time, like you could think of it as a matrix where like on one side is like programming language or web framework or front end framework, and then on the other side is like vulnerability class, or like type of thing you would have to care about, whether that's I don't know, XXE, REDOS, obviously output encoding, like so like all the different things. Like cool, can we just have like an easy way to do this that like you can foot gun yourself, but it's going to be harder. And then eventually if that matrix were filled out, then hopefully developers could largely, I mean, security is, I think there's always business logic flaws, there's always like subtle architecture things, but ideally the basic things that are like, there's not really a reason to do this wrong. It's not application or business context specific. Hopefully those types of issues largely go away in the next, I don't know, 2 to 5 years. I don't know.
You are optimistic, Clint. The next 2 to 5 years. No, I mean, I agree, right? That like that is the way, but I think it's going to take longer, right? Even just from again, like as a third party, and I know Semgrep's probably saying this too, walking into organizations and they're like, hey, we're going to run Semgrep and it's going to catch all the security things, right? And running it against a code base where maybe the framework just isn't that, it's new or it's old and it isn't as well supported as some of the other frameworks that are out there. So guess what? You're probably not going to catch the same level of vulnerabilities and all of the classes of vulnerabilities that you would with something that was better understood, right? And so like I just see this struggle, from the engineering side of things and as trying to help the developers as they step into it. And then to your point about the organizations of themselves, unless the top level managers of those organizations take security seriously and recognize that it is like important for selling their product, they're not going to build that in and they're not going to give it the same level of scrutiny as, hey, these new features that need to be put out there, right? Like if I have to develop a new feature for a client to make a sale, that's going to trump, hey, like me actually implementing a new ORM or implementing a new framework that is secure. And like those sorts of issues that crop up from a business perspective or something that we often ignore from a security perspective and have a real impact on the security of an organization or of a product. And so like, yes, I think there will be solutions that are out there. I agree, but I think it's going to take a lot longer than 2 to 5 years. I mean, not to be contrarian, right, Clint, but like that's just my, my
I'll say this, Seth, though. I will say this. I do think if you talk to any CTO slash CEO and you tell them I have a critical issue where someone today can get into our systems and exfiltrate data, I don't think that they're going to say you shouldn't address that. I think but to the actual example you used was using like some new library or some new whatever to sort of address some class of vulnerabilities that I totally do agree with. I think one thing that's nice though too, like where Semgrep specifically helps out, and I know you work for Semgrep, so we'll bring this up because I think it's prudent.
If you want
like
to, you don't have to. I don't mind.
I know, yeah, I don't. No, I don't. But I think it's actually relevant to this conversation. I know. So one thing I'd say is like, all right, so we have secure by defaults, frameworks that are making things more secure by defaults. And then you start to eliminate specific bug classes that helps. And there is specific, like what I'm finding when I talk to customers and potential customers is that they each have, and this is exactly what you said, Clint, they each have one thing or two things that are specific to them that are just reoccurring issues, and they just need to have some checks built for. And so when you take a product, and I think this is part, I guess where I'm going with this is I think this is part of why Semgrep, I think it's twofold why Semgrep got real popular. It's actually multi-pronged, but for now we'll just concentrate on two things. One is I can use that to quickly look for that specific pain point in my organization, or I can glue together multiple checks to figure that out potentially. And the second part is that like to get support for, to your point about using modern things and using the most best or using the best tech stack for your current problem set, is that you essentially SaaS vendors have a real hard time supporting new tech stacks. They just do. They don't, and maybe the language is supported, but in understanding, like in building a call graph and understanding the interactions that occur within that framework, and then also understanding like its own nuances and inherent security vulnerabilities that could potentially pop up. All that takes a lot of time. Whereas with like a Semgrep, it's like, okay, well, I can go in and I can quickly build those types of checks. So I personally, I mean, I'm curious what you think helped spur Semgrep forward. But I think those were two very powerful things that we just didn't have before as an industry.
Yeah. Before I answer that, just wanted to agree with Seth quickly in terms of like, I totally agree that like if engineering leadership doesn't prioritize security, then it's going to be very hard. And obviously there's like different levels of prioritization. Hopefully if there's criticals that are like obvious business impact, that'll be fixed. But in terms of secure defaults, a lot of it is like non-trivial, like meaningful engineering investments that require, diverting of engineering resources from strictly shipping products and winning deals. So like it does require certain type of leadership and beliefs. And I did a couple of interviews for like my much smaller and less number of issues modern security podcast with a couple of security leaders who specifically have been like able to get some sort of secure by default wins, but really framing them as like engineering productivity. Just like for one example, it's like, hey, we're having this engineering policy about like you can't have services that use images with a certain number of vulnerabilities or a certain number of critical vulnerabilities. And so like you can do a bunch of work yourself, or you can use this golden image I built for you. And like different examples like that, or maybe there was an incident or something, and then it's like, hey, well, would you like to not have this incident in the future that caused you to be on call on a Friday night? Well, here's some infrastructure I built for you such that this problem won't happen. So it's like kind of making their lives easier with like some amount of work. But in general, like I think that's when it's done really well. But in practice, you need kind of engineering leadership buy-in, and that it can be non-trivial. So I don't know. That's a long way to say I agree with what you said.
Yeah. And one of the issues that I see is that it doesn't feel like, well, a lot of the again, like this is my experience. A lot of the organizations that I deal with, they don't necessarily prioritize the security stuff until there's been an incident, right? Which is unfortunate, but you could say the industry as a whole has also responded that same way, right? Like you look at organizations that take security seriously, and usually in their past, they've had something critical pop up or some exposure that has forced them to actually rethink their relationship to security. And, you know, as bad as that is, like just yesterday, talking to another one of the consultants at Redpoint, and we're like, yeah, these guys really need a breach, or it's never going to get there, right? Like they need some incident, which is a sad state of affairs when it comes to it, that we're talking about that being the impetus, as opposed to, wow, we found this really critical vulnerability when we did a penetration test. That just doesn't carry the same weight. So
totally. Yeah. I see that.
Yeah. So I'm being the security nihilist over here. So you can take it with a grain of salt, right? That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. One leaves the industry or stays long enough to be a security nihilist. Not entirely, but but yes. So Ken, to answer your question, so what sort of things led to Semgrep's popularity or different things like that? So I think the flexibility and customizability and ease of writing custom rules has been a big factor. So I'm actually a big static analysis nerd. It's one of like my favorite areas of security. So I've spent a meaningful amount of time either reading the docs or writing custom rules for. I don't know if you guys know this, but I actually interned at Fortify when I was a grad student. So
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. So the acquisition, I think by HP or someone happened during my internship at Fortify. But anyway, so like I was doing that for NCC Group. I helped some companies with their check marks. I've spent time looking at CodeQL. So I've looked at like a number of these different like custom query languages or sort of custom rule languages for various products. And they all have different strengths and weaknesses. But in terms of like going from I know nothing about this to like I'm writing something that's useful, I think, in my opinion, at least personally, Semgrep is way easier to do that. And it's also approachable for like developers, not just security professionals. And it's because the rules kind of look like code. So if you know what kind of code you're trying to match, it's kind of just like there's a few abstractions on top of that. So yeah, because of that, it's been nice for like DigitalOcean wrote a blog post a little bit ago that was like, hey, we had this like bug bounty researcher who found some like access control issues. And then we just wrote, like we did code review for a day or two, found a bunch of examples, and then spent like 1 hour writing a Semgrep rule and found like a bunch of examples that like days of code review hadn't found. And anecdotally, friends of mine at other companies have similarly found, either through their own code review or pen tests or bug bounty submissions, hey, this is like a bad pattern for us. Let me find like other examples of this, and then being able to iterate on that very quickly. Because like writing the rule, at least like if you write like a very complicated advanced rule, that might take some time and iteration and skill. But even like a very basic version that's like pretty good, such that it's returning enough results that like as a human by hand you can look through them, because it's not hundreds of results, it's like 10 or 20 or something. And I guess there's been a number of cases of engineers getting a lot of value from it as well, which is nice. I mean, usually the purchaser is like an application security team, but like for example, developers at Semgrep actually write a bunch of custom Semgrep rules to enforce things that they want, not necessarily like even that have a security purpose. Like for example, naming conventions, or like when we declare a model, it looks like this, or when we declare a route, it looks like this, or we have like, this is how we do CSS or things like that. Like a bunch of things that are like, honestly, I would never think of because they're just like code quality or best practice type things. But it's how they use to enforce like coding consistency, like for them, for their purposes.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool. I guess
and that's that is right. Like, from my perspective, coming from a development background as well, right? Like the linting possibility, like anything that's already in that pipeline that's doing like those sorts of like security checks, right? But it's just the fact that it came from semantic grep, right? Like it doesn't mean that it's only security related. It's interesting to hear that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt too much there.
Oh, no, totally. Yeah, it's yeah, I guess the sort of angle we talk about is security, but basically it's just a very fast, many language supported like code search tool, and like kind of what you want to look for is up to you. It could be performance, it could be reliability, it could be business logic, it could be security, but yeah, it's just like you want to look for code. Cool. Like, yeah, you do whatever you want with that.
Cool. Yeah. Well, good. Yeah. I mean, that does jive pretty well with my own experience with Semgrep, to be honest, right? Like the reason that it has expanded so quickly is the flexibility on top of it, right? Like that's what we always struggled with when I was trying to implement Fortify, years and years ago with large organizations, was this ability to, hey, yeah, you can write Fortify rules, but it was so complicated to do, and you had to understand so much of what was going into it that I would often get them wrong, or whoever the security engineer was that was building them would get it wrong, and then we're missing things. And so we defaulted back to the Fortify defaults for those rules because it was a complex process, as opposed to what we see with Semgrep, with the ability to actually use the playgrounds to check the code, to run very quickly over and over and iterate, has made it possible to, build our own set of secure defaults, or our own set of defaults that we use. So, yeah,
that was always my complaint with CodeQL. Like CodeQL is arguably, I'd say, probably the most. I'd say it's probably the most accurate, most robust, SaaS tool out there. Except that I'm sorry, I'll just say it. It's incredibly hard to actually write rule packs. And not just that, before you even get to writing rules, you do need to explain if it doesn't already know, or you don't already have, you're not already set up for the whatever web framework or tech stack that you're about to analyze. You have to do all that legwork and then write your queries, your rule packs, basically. And so while it's super, and also because it's so focused on accuracy, if that tool doesn't know, say, where like user input comes from, because maybe it's like part of a maybe it's a service-oriented architecture. It's like, okay, well, inputs are coming from a lot of different places, maybe not where you would expect, and then it just won't flag on things that it can't provably say came from user input or tainted sources of data. So it's like, yeah, it's like, even, I guess I'm bringing that up because even the most like robust SaaS tool out there has a very big flaw, which is just usability and getting it wired up for whatever you need. Whereas Semgrep is, I mean, we still, even in the course, mentioned Semgrep. Sorry, our practical secure code course. We still mention it because it's like really good for quickly detecting, like you said, route definitions or certain patterns that you specifically need to pull out inside of the, like, you know, anti-patterns. Like, oh, hey, here's an established good known pattern. Here's an established known bad anti-pattern. Let's go look for those. So really powerful.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have spent some time with CodeQL, and I think it's like certainly a very impressive technology. Like clearly, very smart people built it. It's can be very precise, very powerful. But even like for me, someone who's done static analysis things for years, like it's not trivial for me to get started. Yeah. So I would say if you're willing, like if you're a security researcher or you're someone who's like, I really care about precision, I really want to do the most detailed possible work, and I'm willing to invest like 100 hours in learning this tool, then I would be like, yeah, then it's a great tool.
Right.
But if you're like, I'm busy and there's things I want to do in my life, and I kind of like want to spend an hour or two on this and get value immediately, then I feel like Semgrep is a better fit. But if you're willing to put in the time, I think CodeQL is very great.
Yep, it can be powerful.
Yeah, it's not just willingness. It's like, will you be allowed that time? But anyways, sorry. I know you need to wrap up, and we can go for an hour. And
Yep, and that's what I was going to say, right? Like Clint, it feels like we could go on for at least another 2 or 3 hours if we wanted to. But I do want to be cognizant of your time. We're so appreciative that you came on again. It's so great to catch up and see you. We will have to reprise this, not like in 3 years, but let's try and do it a little bit sooner than that. Because there's always good things that we can talk about and interesting topics. And, you know, it'll be fun to watch DRSec grow from here. Good luck as you make those decisions on where to go next. So,
yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, it's always a pleasure hanging out with you, my friends. And happy to come back anytime. And I will also be enjoying watching Absolute AppSec growing and you all sharing valuable content for people. So keep up the great work. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. Same to you.
All right. Same to you. And Clint, where can people find you if they have questions or they want to reach out?
Sure. Feel free to reach out, Clint Gibler on LinkedIn, or TLDRSEC for Too Long Didn't Read Security.com is the newsletter we've been talking about. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. However, be happy to hear from folks.
All right. Good. Well, thanks to everyone for listening. We will, catch everybody next week. And appreciate everything. Ken, any final thoughts before we close things out today?
No, just keep up the awesome work, Clint. Genuinely big fan. Just appreciate you coming on, and just keep up the good work. So that's it. And thank you to the listeners as well.
Thanks so everybody. Okay.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. Ciao.